A boarding pass for seat 2B should have been his golden ticket. For 17-year-old Marcus Washington, it was a ticket to humiliation. He was a brilliant young man on his way to a life-changing internship, holding a valid first-class ticket paid for by one of the world's top aerospace companies. But in the eyes of one flight attendant, none of that mattered. All she saw was a black teenager, where she thought he didn't belong. She chose to make a stand, to block his path, to publicly shame him. But she never could have imagined who was sitting in the cockpit, watching the whole scene unfold. She didn't know the last name on that boarding pass was about to change everything, and not just for her flight. The air in the jet bridge was a stale, recycled blend of jet fuel industrial cleaner, and the faint collective anxiety of 100 strangers about to be sealed in a metal tube for 5 hours. For Marcus Washington, it was the smell of the future. At 17, he was walking this tunnel alone for the first time, a warrior marching toward his destiny. His stomach was a swirling galaxy of nerves and excitement. He clutched the strap of his worn leather satchel, a gift from his father. Its weight a familiar comfort. Inside his laptop held the code for a drone stabilization algorithm that had won him the prestigious Lockheed Martin Aerospace internship. This flight from Hartsfield-Jackson, Atlanta, International to Seattle-Tacoma was the first step into that new world. The airline ticket printed on crisp cardstock felt like a sacred text in his hand. Seat 2B, first class. Lockheed Martin had insisted on it. "You're our guest, Marcus. We want you rested and ready," the HR representative, a cheerful woman named Brenda, had told him over the phone. He'd never even seen the inside of a first-class cabin before, except in movies. He felt a little guilty, a little out of place, but the thrill was undeniable. He stepped out of the narrow jet bridge and into the bright, hushed cabin of the Boeing 757. The air was different here. Calmer. The seats were less like chairs and more like personal pods upholstered in dark blue leather, each with its own television screen and a neatly folded blanket. He saw 1A and 1B, then his row. Seat 2B, the window seat. Perfect. As he moved to step into the aisle, a figure blocked his path. A flight attendant, a woman in her late 40s with a severe blonde bob and a name tag that read Karen, stood with her arms lightly crossed. Her smile was a thin, brittle line that didn't reach her eyes. "Can I help you, young man?" she asked. The emphasis on young man was subtle, but it was there a verbal pat on the head. "Yes, ma'am," Marcus said, his voice polite. He'd been raised to show respect, especially to his elders. "I'm just trying to get to my seat. 2B. He held up his boarding pass. Karen's eyes flickered down to the ticket, then back up to his face, a meticulous, skeptical inventory. She saw his dark skin, his neat but casual clothes, a Morehouse College sweatshirt and jeans, and the locks tied back from his face. Her smile tightened. "I think you might be mistaken," she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper, as if she were doing him a favor. "The economy cabin is further down the plane. This is first class." The heat rose in Marcus's cheeks. It was a prickly, familiar shame. He'd felt it before in high-end stores, in nice restaurants with his family. The quiet assumption that he didn't belong. "I'm not mistaken," he said, keeping his voice steady. He held the ticket out further. "Seat 2B, Marcus Washington." Karen did not take the ticket. She let it hang in the air between them, a challenge. Sometimes the gate agents make mistakes with the seat assignments. "Why don't you let me see that?" She finally plucked it from his fingers, her nails clicking against the cardstock. She examined it, as if it were a suspected forgery, turning it over her eyes, narrowing. Washington, she said the name, slowly tasting it. A few other first-class passengers were boarding now, their expensive carry-ons rolling silently on the plush carpet. An older white man in a crisp suit. Mr. Henderson paused behind Marcus, letting out an impatient sigh. "Is there a problem here?" Mr. Henderson asked, his voice gravelly, with the impatience of a man who measured his life in billable hours. Karen gave Mr. Henderson a brilliant, reassuring smile. "Just a small mix-up, sir. We'll have it sorted in a moment and get you to your seat." She turned back to Marcus, her face hardening again. "Look," she said, her voice now firm, authoritative. "I'm not sure how you got this ticket, but there's no way you're assigned to this seat. This seat is reserved for our platinum-tier frequent flyers. It's a system error." "It's not an error." Marcus insisted, his frustration starting to fray the edges of his politeness. "The ticket was booked for me, by a company. I can show you the confirmation email." He reached for the satchel slung over his shoulder. "That won't be necessary," Karen snapped, holding up a hand. "You're holding up the boarding process. I'm going to have to ask you to step aside so our other first-class passengers can be seated." She pointed to the galley area near the cockpit door. "Wait over there. I'll come find you once I've sorted this out and found your actual seat in coach." The word actual was a slap. The implication was clear. His presence here was a lie, an intrusion. He could feel the eyes of the other passengers on him now. He saw a woman in seat 3A clutch her pearl necklace and whisper something to her husband, Mr. Henderson just shook his head and maneuvered around Marcus, settling into his own seat with a huff. Humiliation washed over Marcus in a cold wave. He was a scholar, an innovator, the son of a man who had served his country with honor for 30 years. Yet in this moment, he was reduced to a single damning dimension, a black kid in the wrong place. His mind raced. Should he argue? Make a scene? His father's voice echoed in his memory, a constant refrain from his childhood. Stay calm. Be smarter. Don't let their ignorance become your anger. He took a deep breath. "Ma'am, with all due respect, I'm not moving until you scan my ticket and confirm that I am in the correct seat." Karen's face flushed a blotchy red. "Are you refusing to follow a flight crew's instruction?" Her voice was sharp, a weapon now. "Because I can have you removed from this aircraft." This was it. The moment of escalation he had always been taught to avoid. The point where his word against hers would mean nothing. He felt his future, the internship, his dreams all teetering on the edge of a disaster created from thin air by this woman's prejudice. He stood his ground, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs, his eyes locked on hers. "I'm not refusing anything," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "I'm asking you to do your job." From the corner of his eye, he saw her reach for the intercom phone on the wall. "This is Karen at the main cabin door. I need a gate supervisor and security to the jet bridge. We have a passenger refusing to comply." The world seemed to shrink to the small space between them. The quiet chatter of the cabin died. Every eye was on him. He was no longer Marcus Washington, intern and scholar. He was a passenger refusing to comply. He was a problem, a threat. He felt a profound sense of injustice, so sharp and bitter it felt like he could choke on it. And in that moment, he felt utterly, completely alone. The word security hung in the air like a toxic gas, instantly changing the atmosphere in the cabin. The ambient murmur of passengers settling in the rustle of jackets, the click of overhead bins, ceased. A tense silence took its place. Marcus felt a dozen pairs of eyes burn into his back. He was a specimen under glass, a disruption to the placid, privileged ecosystem of first class. Mr. Henderson, the businessman in seat 1A, peered over the top of his Wall Street Journal, his brow furrowed in annoyance. Across the aisle, the woman with the pearls was now whispering animatedly into her phone, her eyes darting toward Marcus. He wasn't just a mix-up anymore. He was a spectacle. Karen stood with the phone receiver held loosely in her hand, a smug, vindicated look on her face. She had followed protocol. She had identified a problem and was now handling it. To her, Marcus was a square peg, trying to force himself into a round hole, and she was the hammer ready to put him in his place. "You've made a very big mistake," she said, her voice low and dripping with condescension. "You should have just gone to the back of the plane when I gave you the chance." Marcus's hands, hidden in the pockets of his sweatshirt, were clenched into fists. His nails dug into his palms. He thought of his mother's parting words at the airport gate just an hour ago. "Be safe. Be smart. Make us proud." He was trying. He was trying to channel his father's unshakable calm, a composure that had seen him through combat zones and high-stakes diplomatic meetings. But the injustice of it all was a physical force, a pressure building behind his eyes. "The only mistake," Marcus said, his voice tight with restrained anger, "is your assumption that I don't belong here." He pulled out his phone. "Here. This is the confirmation from Lockheed Martin. It has my name, the flight number, the seat number, and the purchase confirmation from their corporate travel department. Their contact number is right there. Call them." He held the phone out to her, the screen glowing with the evidence. It was irrefutable proof, but Karen waved a dismissive hand, not even glancing at the screen. "I'm not looking at that. Anyone can fake an email," she scoffed. "We have procedures for a reason, young man. The system in my scanner is what matters, and it's telling me there's an issue with this ticket. The security team will sort it out." It was a blatant lie. She hadn't even tried to scan his ticket. She had judged, sentenced, and convicted him in the space of 30 seconds, based on nothing more than his appearance. Her refusal to even look at his proof was the deepest insult of all. It told him that his reality, his truth, didn't matter. Only her perception did. Just then, two figures appeared at the cabin door, a flustered-looking gate agent, clutching a walkie-talkie, and behind him a burly airport security officer with a stoic, unreadable expression. The officer's presence immediately amplified the tension tenfold. His hand rested near the gear on his belt, a casual but potent symbol of authority. "What's the situation, Karen?" The gate agent, a young man named Leo, asked breathlessly. Karen straightened up, adopting an air of professional gravity. "Leo, I have a passenger here," she said, gesturing to Marcus without looking at him, "who is holding a fraudulent-looking ticket for seat 2B. He is refusing to move and is becoming aggressive. He's holding up the entire boarding process." Aggressive. The word hit Marcus like a punch to the gut. He had been nothing but polite, firm, but respectful. He had kept his voice down. He hadn't moved, but he hadn't threatened. She was painting him as a threat, a dangerous stereotype come to life to justify her actions. "That's not true," Marcus interjected, his voice rising despite his best efforts. "I am not being aggressive. I just asked her to scan my ticket. She refused." The security officer's eyes narrowed, shifting from Karen to Marcus. He was assessing, calculating. "Son," the officer said, his voice a low rumble, "I need you to step off the plane with me so we can discuss this." "Why do I have to get off the plane?" Marcus argued, his voice pleading now. "My seat is right there. Just have her scan the ticket, or let the gate agent check his system. It will take 10 seconds. Leo, the gate agent, looked uncertain. He glanced at Karen, then at his tablet. I can check the manifest. There's no need. Karen cut in sharply, overriding him. He has been disruptive. Airline policy is clear. He needs to be removed while we investigate. She was cementing her narrative, building her case on a foundation of lies. Mr. Henderson had seen enough. He folded his newspaper with a loud crackle and stood up, his large frame filling the aisle. Now hold on just a minute. He boomed, his voice accustomed to commanding boardrooms. I've been sitting right here. The only one being disruptive is your flight attendant. This young man has been perfectly calm. He presented his ticket, and she, for whatever reason, decided it was fake without even checking it. I saw the whole thing. Karen's face turned white with fury. Being challenged by a passenger of Mr. Henderson's apparent status was not part of her plan. Sir, with all due respect, this is a security matter. Please return to your seat. I will not, Mr. Henderson stated flatly. I'm a Diamond Medallion member with this airline for 25 years. I've flown millions of miles. I know bad service when I see it, and this is bordering on harassment. The support from an unexpected corner gave Marcus a surge of courage. He wasn't entirely alone, but it was still a standoff. Karen, the gate agent, and the security officer were a wall of officialdom between him and his seat. The plane was full of passengers who just wanted to get on their way. He could feel their collective impatience pressing in. He was the problem. The delay, the drama on their travel day. Defeated, he felt his shoulders slump. Maybe it was better to just get off, to argue his case on the jet bridge, away from all these staring eyes. He was just a kid. Who would believe him over a uniformed flight attendant? He took a half step back, the fight draining out of him, replaced by a cold, heavy resignation. And that's when another voice cut through the tension. A voice calm, measured, and radiating an authority that eclipsed everyone else's. What seems to be the problem here, Karen? The voice came from the cockpit. The door, which had been slightly ajar, swung fully open. Standing in the doorway was the captain, a man in his late 50s with neatly trimmed silver hair and a kind, weathered face. His pilot's uniform was immaculate, the 4 stripes on his epaulettes gleaming under the cabin lights. He surveyed the scene, the tense flight attendant, the anxious gate agent, the stoic security guard, the indignant businessman, and the weary, humiliated teenager at the center of it all. His eyes, a clear, intelligent blue, rested on Marcus for a moment, before moving to Karen, waiting for an explanation. The captain had arrived. The appearance of Captain Robert Davis had an immediate and palpable effect on the cabin. It was like a teacher stepping into a squabbling classroom. The security guard's rigid posture relaxed slightly. Leo, the gate agent, looked relieved to have a higher authority present. Even Mr. Henderson seemed to defer, giving a slight nod of respect. Authority in the air is absolute, and on an aircraft, the captain's word is law. Karen, however, seemed to see the captain's arrival as an opportunity to solidify her position. She immediately launched into her carefully constructed narrative. Captain Davis, thank you, she said, her voice a practiced blend of concern and professionalism. I was just about to call you. We have a passenger here with a questionable boarding pass for seat 2B. He's refusing to cooperate and was becoming quite agitated. For the safety and comfort of our other passengers, I felt it best to have security escort him off the plane while we sort out his actual seating. Captain Davis listened patiently, his gaze never leaving Karen's face. He had a way of listening that seemed to absorb not just the words, but the intent behind them. When she finished, he didn't immediately respond. Instead, he let a beat of silence pass, allowing the weight of her accusations to settle in the air. Then he turned his attention to Marcus. His expression was not accusatory or skeptical. It was neutral patient. He looked at the boy, at his youthful face, the frustration and hurt warring in his eyes, the slight tremble in his hands, and saw not a threat but a teenager in a deeply stressful situation. "Son," the captain said, his voice calm and even, "what's your side of the story?" It was the first time someone in uniform had asked for his perspective without a filter of suspicion. The simple act of being asked, of being seen as a person with a story to tell, was enough to steady Marcus's frayed nerves. He took a breath. "Sir, my name is Marcus Washington. My ticket is for seat 2B. I showed it to her." He gestured towards Karen, and she told me I was mistaken and that this was the first-class cabin. She said the seat wasn't for me and refused to scan my ticket. When I tried to show her my confirmation email from the company that booked the flight, she accused me of faking it and called security. He held up his boarding pass. "All I'm asking is for someone to scan the ticket." Captain Davis nodded slowly. He looked from the boarding pass in Marcus's hand to Karen, whose face was a mask of indignant denial. "Karen, did you attempt to scan his boarding pass?" The captain asked, his tone still mild, but with an underlying edge of steel. Karen faltered for a second. "Well, no, Captain. My handheld scanner was flagging a system-wide alert for that seat block, and based on my experience, so you did not scan his specific ticket," Captain Davis interrupted, cutting through the jargon. It wasn't a question. It was a statement of fact. He then looked at Leo. "Leo, can you please scan the young man's pass with your device?" "Of course, Captain," Leo said, stepping forward eagerly. Karen shot him a venomous look but said nothing. Marcus handed his boarding pass to Leo. The gate agent pressed it against the scanner on his tablet. A cheerful affirmative beep echoed through the silent cabin. Green letters flashed on the screen. Washington Marcus, Seat 2B, Zone 1. Confirmed. Leo turned the tablet screen towards Captain Davis. "It's valid, Captain. Green light. He's checked in and confirmed for 2B. A collective sigh seemed to ripple through the nearby passengers. Mr. Henderson crossed his arms with a satisfied, "I told you so," grunt. The security guard took a half-step back, effectively removing himself from the situation. The entire basis for the confrontation had just evaporated into thin air. Karen's face was a storm of conflicting emotions, shock, embarrassment, and a stubborn refusal to admit defeat. That must be a mistake. The system must have just updated. It was showing a conflict moments ago, I'm sure of it. Captain Davis ignored her. His focus was entirely on Marcus. He stepped forward and took the boarding pass from Leo, his eyes scanning the printed details. He looked at the flight number, the destination, and then he stopped, his gaze fixed on the name. Washington Marcus. A flicker of recognition of something profound crossed the captain's face. His professional demeanor softened, replaced by a look of dawning realization and something else. A deep, personal respect. He looked up from the ticket and met Marcus's eyes. A slow, genuine smile spread across his face. Washington. Captain Davis said, his voice now imbued with a warmth that hadn't been there before. I thought that name sounded familiar. He held the boarding pass, but he wasn't looking at it anymore. He was looking at Marcus as if seeing him for the first time, not as a passenger, but as a connection to a past he held sacred. "Tell me," the captain said, his voice dropping slightly, becoming more personal. "Is your father by any chance General James Washington?" The cabin, already quiet, seemed to hold its breath. Karen's jaw went slack. Marcus, stunned by the sudden unexpected turn of events, could only nod. "Yes, sir," he managed to say. "He is." The captain's smile widened. He shook his head in quiet disbelief. He turned not to Marcus, but to the stunned flight attendant. His voice, when he spoke to her, had lost all of its earlier mildness. It was cold, clear, and carried the full weight of his command. "Karen," Captain Davis said, his eyes locking onto hers. "You have just made a very, very serious mistake." The captain's words fell like stones into the silent cabin, each one landing with a heavy thud of finality. The pronouncement wasn't just about a procedural error. It was a judgment. Karen Miller visibly paled, the blood draining from her face, leaving behind a splotchy, panicked mask. She understood in that single, chilling moment that she had crossed a line she hadn't even known existed. Captain Davis turned his back on her completely, a gesture of dismissal more potent than any reprimand. He faced Marcus, his entire demeanor transformed. The authoritative pilot was gone, replaced by a man looking at the son of a revered friend. "Marcus," he said, handing the boarding pass back with a reverence usually reserved for an important document. "I am Captain Robert Davis. It is an honor to meet you. I flew F-16s under your father's command in the 388th Fighter Wing at Hill Air Force Base. He was my wing commander." The captain's voice was filled with a profound respect that hushed the remaining whispers in the cabin. This wasn't just a casual acquaintance. It was a bond forged in the crucible of military service. "Your father," Captain Davis continued, his eyes taking on a distant look, "is one of the finest men I have ever known. He was more than a commander. He was a mentor. He taught us about leadership integrity and grace under pressure. There was a time during a mission over hostile territory when my jet had had a catastrophic engine failure. I was ready to eject. Your father, flying escort, talked me through a dead stick landing that everyone said was impossible. He stayed on my wing the entire time, calm as ever, even when enemy radar was painting us. He saved my life that day, Marcus. He saved my life, and he saved my career." He paused, letting the story settle. The other passengers were no longer just watching a scene. They were listening to a testament. Mr. Henderson leaned forward, captivated. Even the woman with the pearls looked on with wide, remorseful eyes. Marcus was no longer an anonymous teenager. He was the scion of a hero, his identity suddenly illuminated by the reflected glory of his father. Marcus was speechless. He'd heard the stories, of course, but hearing it from this man in this place made it real and immediate. I didn't know," he stammered. "Your father isn't one to boast," Captain Davis said with a soft chuckle. "He's a man of action, not words. The name Washington on a flight manifest to Seattle. I should have put it together sooner. He mentioned his son was brilliant with tech, heading for a big internship." He looked at Marcus with pride, as if he were his own son. Then slowly, deliberately, he turned back to Karen. The warmth in his expression vanished, replaced by an icy disappointment that was far more terrifying than anger. "Karen," he began, his voice low and controlled. "General Washington taught us that a leader's greatest responsibility is to make sound judgments based on facts, not on prejudice or assumptions. He taught us to see the person, not the package they come in. You failed that test today. Spectacularly." Karen opened her mouth to speak, to offer an excuse, a defense, anything. "Captain, I was only trying to follow procedure. I thought—" "No." Captain Davis cut her off, his voice sharp as a shard of glass. "You didn't think. You reacted. You saw a young black man in a hoodie and you decided he didn't belong in your cabin. You bypassed procedure, the simple act of scanning a ticket to enforce your own biases. You chose to humiliate a passenger. Not just any passenger, but the son of a man to whom I and this country owe an immense debt. You did this in front of my crew and my passengers. You have not only embarrassed this airline, you have embarrassed yourself and the uniform you wear. Every word was a perfectly aimed blow, stripping away her excuses, her justifications, her professional pride. She shrank under his verbal barrage, her eyes darting around for an ally, but finding none. The security guard was now intently studying the pattern on the carpet. Leo, the gate agent, was busy with his tablet. The passengers either stared at her with open disapproval or pointedly looked away. Captain Davis wasn't finished. "Step aside," he commanded. Karen, looking utterly defeated, moved out of the aisle as if in a trance. The captain then turned to Marcus, his expression once again warm and paternal. "Marcus, please allow me to show you to your seat. 2B, the window seat. I trust you'll find it comfortable." He gestured down the aisle with an open hand, a clear and public display of honor. He walked with Marcus to the second row, his hand resting lightly on the young man's shoulder. The act was both an apology and a proclamation. He personally checked the space, ensured the blanket was in place, and then leaned in. "Once we're at cruising altitude," he said in a low voice, meant only for Marcus. "I'd be honored if you'd come up to the cockpit. I'd like to show you the flight deck. I think you'll appreciate the avionics." "Wow. Yes, sir. I'd love that," Marcus said, his voice filled with genuine awe. The humiliation he'd felt moments before was being washed away by this unexpected, overwhelming wave of respect. "Good." Captain Davis straightened up and addressed the cabin. "Folks, my apologies for the delay. We'll be closing the cabin door momentarily and should be on our way shortly." He gave Marcus one last reassuring nod before turning to walk back toward the cockpit. As he passed Karen, who was still standing frozen in the galley, he paused. "We will be having a conversation the moment we land in Seattle," he said, his voice barely a whisper, yet carrying the weight of an iron promise. "You, me, and the Chief of In-Flight Services." He didn't wait for a reply. He disappeared into the cockpit, the heavy door closing behind him with a solid final click. The sound echoed in the silent cabin like the door of a vault, sealing Karen Miller's fate inside with her. The 5-hour flight to Seattle stretched before Karen Miller like a barren desert. The closing of the cockpit door was the beginning of the longest and most excruciating journey of her 22-year career. The cabin, once her kingdom, had become a tribunal, and every passenger a silent judge. The boarding process finished in a blur. As the plane taxied to the runway, Karen moved through the cabin on autopilot, her motions stiff and robotic. Her usual pre-flight announcements, once delivered with crisp authority, came out as a flat, lifeless monotone. She avoided making eye contact with anyone, especially the first 2 rows. Her world had shrunk to the floor, the seat numbers, the latches of the overhead bins. Marcus settled into seat 2B, the supple leather, a stark contrast to the sharp-edged anxiety that still lingered in his chest. He looked out the window, watching the ground crew scurry below, but his mind was replaying the last 20 minutes on a loop. The humiliation, the sudden intervention, the shocking revelation of the captain's connection to his father. It felt surreal, like a scene from a movie. Mr. Henderson from seat 1A leaned back, catching his eye. He gave Marcus a slow, approving nod. "You handled that with dignity, son," he murmured, his voice low enough not to carry. "Don't let people like her ever make you question who you are." The words of support from the gruff businessman meant more to Marcus than he could have imagined. It was a simple acknowledgement that he had been seen and seen correctly. The true trial for Karen began after takeoff, once the seatbelt sign was switched off. Her job required her to serve the very people who had witnessed her disgrace. Her first walk through the first-class cabin to take drink orders was a gauntlet of averted gazes and pointed silence. When she reached row 2, her composure nearly broke. She stood beside Marcus's seat, her notepad trembling slightly in her hand. Can I get you anything to drink?" she stammered, her eyes fixed on the seat back in front of him. Marcus looked up at her. There was no malice in his eyes, no triumphant smirk. There was just a quiet, observant calm. He could have been difficult. He could have made a cutting remark. He could have refused to speak to her at all. But his father's and his mother's teachings ran deeper than that. Grace, they had always told him, is a weapon they never see coming. "I'll have a ginger ale, please." "No ice," he said, his voice even and polite. His simple, courteous request was almost more damning than an insult would have been. It offered her no fight, no drama, no way to release the tension coiling in her gut. She was a service professional, and he was a passenger, and he was treating her exactly as such, politely and impersonally. It was a masterclass in quiet dignity, and it made her feel an inch tall. She practically fled to the galley to prepare the drinks. As she poured his ginger ale, her hands shook so much, a little of it sloshed over the side. An hour into the flight, as promised, the first officer emerged from the cockpit and made his way to Marcus's seat. "Mr. Washington, Captain Davis, would like to invite you to the flight deck now if you're ready." Every head in first class turned. An invitation to the cockpit during a flight was a rare privilege, a clear sign of the captain's high esteem. Marcus excused himself and followed the co-pilot. As he walked past the galley, he saw Karen standing there, polishing a glass with a cloth, her movements frantic and useless. She watched him go, her expression a mixture of envy and dread. He was being welcomed into the inner sanctum, while she was being exiled to the fringes. For the next 30 minutes, Marcus was in a different world. Captain Davis showed him the complex array of screens and controls, explaining the fly-by-wire system and the navigation software with an infectious passion. He spoke of Marcus's father, sharing another story, this one, about the general's uncanny ability to fix a faulty generator in the desert with nothing but a multi-tool and a piece of wire. They didn't speak of the incident during boarding. They didn't have to. The captain's actions spoke louder than any words could. By treating Marcus with such profound respect, he was erasing the stain of Karen's prejudice. When Marcus returned to his seat, he felt a renewed sense of confidence. The shame had been replaced by a quiet pride, not just in his father, but in himself for how he'd handled the situation. The rest of the flight passed in a similar vein. Karen had to serve Marcus his meal, her hands trembling as she placed the tray of pan-seared salmon and wild rice on his table. She had to offer him dessert. She had to refill his drink. Each interaction was a fresh wave of humiliation for her. She was forced again and again to serve the young man she had deemed unworthy of even sitting in her cabin. Her prejudice had been not only exposed but professionally neutered. Her authority was gone, replaced by the servile necessity of her job. She was trapped at 35,000 feet with the living, breathing embodiment of her career-ending mistake. The real punishment wasn't a reprimand shouted in anger. It was the quiet, 5-hour-long reality of her own irrelevance. The descent into Seattle was smooth, the city lights twinkling below like a carpet of scattered diamonds. For most passengers, It was the peaceful end to a long journey. For Karen Miller, it was the prelude to her execution. As the wheels of the Boeing 757 touched down on the tarmac with a gentle chirp, the sound seemed to announce the arrival of her judgment day. During deplaning, the passengers from first class filed past, some of them giving Karen a final cold look. Mr. Henderson paused beside her. "I hope you learned something from this," he said, his voice low and severe, before continuing up the jet bridge. It was not a wish for her well-being. It was a condemnation. As the last economy passenger disappeared, Captain Davis emerged from the cockpit, his uniform jacket now on his hat in his hand. His first officer followed. The captain's friendly demeanor was gone, replaced by the grim focus of a commander about to perform a deeply unpleasant but necessary duty. "Karen," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "Stay here. The rest of the crew, you are dismissed. Thank you for the flight." The other flight attendants scurried away, their faces a mixture of pity and relief, leaving Karen alone to face the captain. A moment later, two figures walked down the jet bridge and onto the plane. A man in a sharp suit, Tom Cheney, the airline's Seattle-based chief of in-flight services, and a woman from human resources. Their faces were grim. They convened in the now empty first-class cabin, the very scene of the crime. It felt like a courtroom. "Karen," Tom Cheney began, his tone all business. "I was alerted by Captain Davis mid-flight about an incident during boarding. He gave me his report. We've also received a formal and very detailed complaint filed electronically during the flight from a Mr. Daniel Henderson in Seat 1A, one of our most valued million-mile flyers. His account corroborates the captain's report precisely." Karen stood stiffly, her hands clasped in front of her. "Tom Captain, there was a misunderstanding. The system was showing an alert, and I was concerned about security protocols." "Save it, Karen." Cheney cut her off, his patience clearly non-existent. "We pulled your record. This isn't the first time a complaint of this nature has been filed against you. There was an incident in Denver 6 months ago with a Hispanic family, and one in Miami last year involving a passenger in a wheelchair. A pattern of behavior is emerging, and it's one our company has zero tolerance for." The HR representative stepped forward, holding a tablet. "Karen, your actions constitute a severe violation of company policy, and more importantly, they may have violated federal regulations prohibiting discrimination by air carriers. You denied boarding privileges based on appearance. You refused to verify a valid travel document. You escalated the situation by calling security without cause and by making false claims about the passenger's behavior. The potential liability for this airline is enormous." Each point was a nail in her coffin. She looked desperately toward Captain Davis, perhaps hoping for a sliver of mercy. "Captain Davis," she pleaded. "It was a mistake. A terrible mistake in judgment. 22 years. I've given this company 22 years of my life." Captain Davis looked at her. His blue eyes filled not with rage, but with a profound and weary disappointment. 22 years is long enough to learn how to treat people with basic decency and respect, Karen. Long enough to learn that your job is to serve and protect all your passengers, not just the ones who fit your personal profile. The uniform you wear represents this company and the trust that millions of people place in us. You violated that trust." He paused, his gaze unyielding. "General Washington once told me, the only thing worse than a bad soldier is a bad leader who thinks they're a good one. You put yourself in a position of leadership over that cabin, and you failed, miserably." The finality in his tone was absolute. Cheney stepped forward again. "Effective immediately. Karen, you are suspended without pay pending a full and formal investigation. Given the evidence and multiple witness statements, I need to be clear with you that termination of your employment is the most likely outcome. You'll hand over your company ID and badge now. An airport official will escort you from the premises." The words hit her like a physical blow. Her career, her identity, the life she had known for over 2 decades. It was all dissolving in the cold, clinical language of corporate policy. She fumbled with the lanyard around her neck, her fingers clumsy and numb. As she handed over her ID, a single tear finally traced a path down her cheek. It was in that moment of utter defeat that the final crushing twist of karma was delivered. A woman appeared at the open door of the aircraft. She was impeccably dressed in a tailored navy blue suit, exuding an aura of quiet power and intelligence. She looked around the cabin, her eyes landing on Captain Davis. "Captain Davis?" she asked, her voice clear and confident. "I'm Alana Reed. I'm the Director of Advanced Propulsion Systems at Lockheed Martin's Skunk Works division. I'm here to pick up our new intern. I was told he was with you." Captain Davis's professional smile returned instantly. "Dr. Reed, an absolute pleasure. Yes, Marcus is right up the jet bridge waiting for you. A remarkable young man. You've got a future star on your hands." "We know," Dr. Reed said with a warm smile. His algorithm paper was one of the most innovative submissions we've seen from an applicant of any age. He's not just an intern, he's a prodigy. We have a whole team eager to start working with him. Karen, standing just a few feet away, overheard every word. The blood rushed in her ears. Her entire narrative, the one she had constructed in her mind to justify her prejudice, crumbled to dust. She hadn't just mistreated the son of a war hero. She had tried to humiliate a boy genius, a future leader in the very aerospace industry her airline depended on. She had seen a kid in a hoodie who didn't belong, when in fact he was arguably the most important person on that entire plane, a VIP, whose mind would help design the very aircraft of the future. She had misjudged him, not just on his character, not just on his background, but on his very essence. It was a failure of perception, so total, so catastrophically wrong, that it defied comprehension. As the airport official gently but firmly guided her toward the jet bridge, she saw Marcus standing there, shaking hands with Dr. Reed. The two of them already deep in conversation, their faces bright with the promise of the future. A future Karen had just been permanently ejected from. In the months that followed, the paths of Marcus Washington and Karen Miller diverged so sharply they might as well have been living in different universes. For Marcus, the incident on the plane became a footnote in the story of the most transformative summer of his life. For Karen, it was the cataclysm that ended her world. The investigation was swift and merciless. With testimony from Captain Davis, a scathing report from Daniel Henderson, and corroborating statements from several other first-class passengers, the outcome was never in doubt. Karen Miller was terminated for gross misconduct and violations of federal anti-discrimination laws. The union offered a token defense, but quickly abandoned her case when the airline presented the evidence from her personnel file, the pattern of prior complaints that Cheney had mentioned. The incident with Marcus wasn't a one-off mistake. It was the inevitable explosive culmination of years of unchecked bias. She was blacklisted. The airline industry is a surprisingly small world, and a termination for passenger discrimination is a scarlet letter. No other major carrier would touch her. Even the budget airlines, desperate for experienced crew, saw her as too toxic, too much of a liability. Her 22 years of experience were rendered worthless overnight. 6 months later, Karen was working as a cashier at a brightly lit, sterile supermarket in a Seattle suburb. The crisp blue uniform was replaced by a cheap, ill-fitting polyester vest. The authority in her voice was gone, replaced by the forced, weary cheerfulness of customer service. "Did you find everything okay today? Will that be paper or plastic?" she would ask. Her eyes hollow, her movements slow. Occasionally a customer would recognize her from a local news snippet that had briefly covered the story, and she would see the flicker of recognition and judgment in their eyes before they hurried away. The humiliation wasn't a one-time event on a plane. It was now the daily grinding reality of her new life. She had lost her career, her pride, and the comfortable middle-class life she had taken for granted. Karma hadn't just knocked on her door, it had kicked the door down and repossessed the entire house. Meanwhile, Marcus thrived. The Lockheed Martin internship was everything he had dreamed of, and more. He wasn't just fetching coffee, he was an integral part of Dr. Reed's team, his innovative algorithm being tested and integrated into a real-world drone guidance system. His mind, sharp and hungry for challenges, was celebrated. His insights were valued. He was judged not by his sweatshirt or his skin color, but by the quality of his work and the brilliance of his ideas. The company was so impressed that they offered him a full-ride scholarship to complete his degree at Morehouse, followed by a guaranteed high-level position at their legendary Skunk Works facility upon graduation. Captain Davis kept in touch, emailing Marcus every few weeks to check in, a mentor and friend found in the most unlikely of circumstances. The incident had in a strange way fortified him. It had shown him the ugliness of prejudice, but it had also shown him the power of integrity, the importance of allies, and his own deep reservoir of strength and grace. A year later, Marcus was flying back to Seattle for his second summer at Lockheed Martin. He was once again in Seat 2B, a seat he had now earned 10 times over. As he settled in, he watched a new flight attendant, a young woman with a kind smile, warmly helping a nervous-looking family find their seats, patiently answering their questions in Spanish. He saw another young man, probably around his own age, walk into the first-class cabin, looking just as out of place and excited as Marcus had a year ago. The flight attendant didn't look at him with suspicion. She simply smiled and said, "Welcome aboard. Can I help you find your seat?" Marcus leaned his head back against the leather seat and smiled. The world hadn't magically been cured of people like Karen Miller. But today, on this flight, in this cabin, things were as they should be. The system had corrected itself. A single act of prejudice had been met with a resounding consequence, creating a small space for decency to flourish. It was a quiet victory, but a victory nonetheless. He was on his way, flying high above the clouds, his future as bright and boundless as the open sky outside his window. That single flight became a defining moment, a story of two completely different paths, forged by a single choice. On one side, a choice born from prejudice led to a professional and personal freefall. On the other, a young man's calm and dignified response in the face of discrimination became the catalyst for a future brighter than he could have ever imagined. This story is a powerful reminder that our actions, especially those fueled by bias, have consequences that can ripple out and change lives forever. It also shows us that integrity and character are their own rewards. If you were moved by Marcus's story and believe that karma in the end delivers its verdict, please show your support by hitting that like button. Share this video with others who appreciate stories of justice and consequence. And don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications for more incredible real-life stories that will inspire and make you think. Thank you for listening.